blessed is our God at all times, both now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Heavenly King, Consoler, Spirit of truth, present in all places and filling all things, the treasury of blessings and the giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O good one. Welcome back, everyone, after our Thanksgiving break, taking a week off. It's good to be back with you. Let's jump right into our gospel text, which we're really going to focus upon today, which really concludes with the theme of praise and giving glory to God, which ties in nicely with our Thanksgiving theme this time of year. So we're on the 14th Sunday after Holy Cross, and the text from the gospel is Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18, verse 35. Luke 18, verse 35 through 43. So as I mentioned last time we were together, make sure you write these down for yourself, because I hope that you're kind of using our time together as a launch board for further study for yourself. Luke chapter 18, verse 35 through 43. At that time when Jesus came close to Jericho, a certain blind man was sitting by the wayside, begging. But hearing a crowd passing by, he inquired what this might be. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth was going to pass. And he cried out, saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who went in front angrily tried to silence him. But he cried out all the louder, Son of David, have mercy on me. Then Jesus stopped and commanded that he should be brought to him. And when he came close, he asked him, saying, What would you have me do for you? And he said, Lord, that I may see. And Jesus said to him, Recover your sight. Your faith has saved you. And at once he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, upon seeing it, gave praise to God. Father Sebastian, as we usually do, let's kind of contextualize our place here in the gospel account of where this particular healing takes place in the context of all of Jesus's kind of healing ministry and his passion in Jerusalem and so forth.
The synoptic gospels all tell us the same chronology for the most part of Jesus's Galilean ministry. After his baptism, he's in Galilee for a period of time. It's from John's gospel that we learned that was somewhere around 3 years. But the Galilean ministry in the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which we're in that gospel now, tell us about Jesus being in Galilee for a period of time. And this is the story and the period in which we hear him always getting into boats, and they're throwing nets overboard, they're catching fish, and there's crowds on the shore and healings and things. And Jesus is in Capernaum for a lot of that time. At the end of that period, Jesus then asks his disciples, Who do men say that I am? And they all identify him as the Christ, and the voice of Peter there. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, which means he's the Messiah. He's the long-awaited Messiah, the earthly king they've been waiting to return to his palace in Jerusalem, and then rule and reestablish the kingdom of God. That first half of the gospel is framed by that theme. It begins at the baptism, where you have that messianic imagery, the Spirit descending. He is the anointed one. He is the king. And you even have the voice from above saying, this is my son, my beloved son. So at the end of that section of the gospel, we then have, we hear at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asking his disciples now, what do you think? And they say, you are, as we learned from the baptism, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so now we come to the second part of the gospel, and Jesus is now heading toward Jerusalem. And he does that by heading down the Jordan Valley, right along the river there. And as we've done it before many times, just a few, it was last summer we were there last time, heading up the river. Eventually you have to turn toward Jericho, and then through Jericho up to Jerusalem. And so that is the road on which Jesus is walking at this point. And it says as he's approaching Jericho. So he's done with his Galilean ministry. He's now headed to Jerusalem, and halfway between the river, the Jordan River there, and Jerusalem is the city of Jericho. So Jesus is going to pass through there.
Of course, this text is given to us in the context of the pre-Christmas fast and a time of preparation. It's important. I mentioned this, I guess, 2 weeks ago before we took our Thanksgiving break, that this whole time period really liturgically is a time of expectation, a time of preparation for Jesus's coming, but not only looking back 2,000 years ago, as is common in the Latin West, to see the historical event of the nativity of Christmas, of the child in the manger and the animals and so forth, but really looking forward toward the second coming. There's this meeting in the liturgy that today this happens. Today Christ is born. Today Christ comes to be in our midst. So not only looking back, but a realization that we are preparing now very much as those people should have prepared, at least that day in Jerusalem. We are preparing now as we would prepare for the coming of Christ at the end of time. I was as I was looking at this text, I thought about the beautiful phrase at the end of the prophet Malachi, that the Son of Righteousness is coming with healing in his wings. And here Jesus meets this man who is blind. This is a different man than the guy who was blind from birth in the Gospel of John, but nevertheless, the story is in some sense similar, because there's not only you have the blind man, but you have the guys around him. And that's much of what's going on here in the story, is not only the blind man, but also those who are reacting around him to this situation. And we place ourselves here liturgically, it's very much in this context. We'll have a chance to kind of unpack that. Where would we be in this crowd? As soon as Jesus approaches Jericho, as you said, we've been to this very place. We've proclaimed this gospel here, there in the Orthodox Church in Jericho, and the man who cannot see asks who it is. And there seems to be a progression here, Father, between that the people that he asks tell him it's Jesus of Nazareth. Immediately he turns, he doesn't say Jesus of Nazareth, he says Son of David. He proclaims Son of David. And then later when Jesus says, what would you have me do for you? And of course, I mean, it's pretty obvious what he wants. But the fathers of the church say that Jesus oftentimes asks these questions to kind of elicit a deeper desire to draw out the person into this kind of a relationship with him, because it's only in that relationship that this healing begins to take place, a shared life, Jesus's healing life. But do we have this kind of three proclamations or declarations of who this is? Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Son of David, and then finally, this blind man says, Lord, Lord, that I may see. And I wonder if you could help us understand, because I know these are titles that we become used to hearing about Jesus. Of course, he's Jesus of Nazareth. Of course, he's Son of David. Of course, he's the Lord. But these are titles packed with deep meaning in the Old Testament. I wonder if you could kind of unpack those for us.
Yeah, we know that Jesus was known as Jesus of Nazareth. He grew up there. Joseph was from Nazareth. And so he's identified in the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels, a number of times, even in John's Gospels, as having come from Nazareth. Although we who have the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke know that there was a little extra story there, and that is that he was actually born in Bethlehem. So, they're telling him, Jesus of Nazareth, the prophet, is coming through. But, and then he cries out, Son of David, right? So he identifies. He who cannot see, as you said, with physical eyes, with faith, obviously knows this is not just Jesus of Nazareth. It's not just some guy from Nazareth. This is the long-awaited Messiah. Son of David is a title for the long-awaited Messiah who is to come in the line of David. So to call someone Son of David like this is equivalent to say Christ or Messiah, that is anointed king of the line of David, the long-awaited return of the Messiah. And of course, when he does that, the crowds who can't see what he can see, although they have those physical eyes. They tell him to be quiet, silence, silence. And the reason why, and I think maybe as we're listening to this, it's probably not too surprising, because this is what we've been hearing all the way along, all the way through the Galilean ministry. Whenever Jesus heals somebody, he himself tells the people to be quiet, quiet, quiet. The crowds start to get too big, he gets in a boat, goes the other side. He's trying to avoid fame, it looks like. He's trying to avoid something, as we've talked about a number of times. This is often referred to in modern biblical studies as the messianic secret. There's Jesus, the crowds, everyone's trying to keep this thing quiet. But there's a significant change at this very moment. This is the hinge passage where all that changes. The crowds are saying to be quiet, and Jesus says, no, bring him here. And Jesus then heals him, and he does not remain quiet, as we're going to see here. And Jesus doesn't tell him to remain quiet. In fact, Jesus will not say to remain quiet to anyone after this. When he gets into Jerusalem, the crowds are going to be cheering, "Save us, Son of David." And even the priests and the Sadducees are going to say, "Hey, don't you think you should tell the people to quiet down?" And he says, "If I were, even the rocks would proclaim at this point." So there's the messianic secret, is that part of the gospel that Jesus is the Messiah. That's revealed now. That's done. But now what's going on in the second part of the gospel is, as you pointed out, there's a second stage here, a third stage of revelation. He's not just Jesus of Nazareth. He's not just the long-awaited earthly Messiah, the earthly king, but he's also the divine king that they were waiting to return to the palace in Jerusalem as well, the temple. And so this second half of the synoptic gospels are intended to reveal that, and begin to reveal the divinity of Jesus, which starts not with a baptism, but now with the transfiguration, and concludes not with Caesarea Philippi, but the empty tomb. And so there's that theme there. And as you mentioned, the word Lord is obviously packed with all sorts of imagery, because that word Lord, Kyrios in Greek, is that circumlocution from the Old Testament, and the Greek form of the Old Testament for the divine name.
Father, with that background, that's kind of this nice broad context, but there's also this guy standing here. It's so important that we understand that context, because it's within that context that Luke is writing and trying to get us to see and understand Jesus in terms of this whole Old Testament background, and also what Jesus has been doing. And as you mentioned, that he has now concluded this ministry in Galilee. He's heading to Jerusalem. He's heading to the Passion. So very much the book of his healings have closed in a sense of their purpose. And now there's crowds surrounding him. In fact, I was just looking back in our preparations to be together. This text jumped out at me the other day in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, and it's right there. We can turn there actually. I made a note. For myself. Yeah, Luke chapter 12, verse 1. You mentioned the transfiguration, which has already taken place in chapter 9, right? And then we saw that a few weeks ago about Jesus turning his face towards Jerusalem. So he's making his way now. His focus really is upon going to Jerusalem. And it's important that we see what's going on. And we so often look at geography. And here's a little detail that can also help us. In chapter 12, verse 1, in the meantime, when so many thousands of the multitude had gathered together that they trod upon one another, he began to say to his disciples, okay, he goes on to condemn the Pharisees there. And I point that out because Jesus is making his way to Jerusalem, and I think we're affected very much by cartoons and or pictures of Jesus, riding on his donkey with his long hair and his Birkenstocks and so forth. And there's 5 or 10 guys around him, but he's a major concern. He's a major political player, and there's as Luke describes, a multitude of people, so many that they're just like, it's like a modern day rock concert almost. And then in the midst of all of that craziness, and in the midst of that context of these titles in the Old Testament. So where there's this guy, and he's blind. He cannot see. And I mentioned before this parallel, very similar to this man in Jerusalem in the Gospel of John, and then Jesus is healing there. Jesus has just completed his healing ministry in many ways. I mean, this is maybe you could say is the final, or well, he's going to go and raise Lazarus also, but very much all of that healing ministry, its purpose of bringing people to faith has concluded now. And he comes and he finds a guy who hasn't seen anything of what Jesus has done. Of all of the multitude of people there, and that multitude is going to make their way to Jerusalem now, and they're going to be the ones calling for his crucifixion. Of all of those people standing in this story, he is the only one who didn't see anything. And yet he is the one who is going to come to faith. You know, in John, in that text in John chapter 9, it says, "For this I came into the world." Jesus is saying this at the end of that healing. "And for this I came in the world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Of course, the seeing here is a much deeper thing, right? It's not only that this man was given his sight, but that he was able to see who Jesus was. While so many around him are blind. You know, St. Ephrem, I always love St. Ephrem. His insights are so wonderful. It says, while he was asking who it was, they said to him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He knew that they were not saying that to him with love. He left what pertained to enemies, and he grasped hold of what pertained to friends. "Son of David, have mercy on me." And you know, St. Ephrem oftentimes he waxes eloquently on these texts and makes, you know, but it's an interesting insight here, is that they see Jesus very much as the Nazarene, and he is able to graduate in faith to the one who realizes it's the Lord himself who's come to heal him. You know, it's these same men, as I said, who will go in a few days and deny Christ with their mouth. And notice what they do here. The guys that are leading, I like that text. They're leading. They're the ones at the front. They place themselves at the front, right? And they try to make the blind man also mute. They try to make him not speak. So they're going to make him into the blind man who can't speak, but Jesus is going to come, and Jesus is going to do the exact opposite. The man's now going to see and is going to be able to proclaim with his mouth. You know how important it is as we draw toward the Feast of the Nativity, the coming of Christ in the flesh, that first, number one, we realize our own blindness, our own need for healing, and that we're not ashamed of Christ. Our society would very much like to do to us what these guys want to do to this guy, right? To mute us, to not allow us to cry out publicly to the only one who can save us. And then also, you know, notice the power of faith here. And Jesus places so much of an emphasis upon this gift of faith. I've thought so many times about this, how powerful faith is. And faith is, first of all, a gift from God, and it's our assent, our entrusting of ourselves very much to that which we have not seen. This man is a great example of that. Okay, he has not seen. But notice how much we learn about faith in this text. Though we are not able to see, though this man cannot see Jesus, it's not that he doesn't know him. In fact, he very much knows him beyond those who should have known him in the group, right, in the crowds. He knew that he was the Christ. And in a similar way, our faith is not a lack of knowing, I guess, or someone call it like blind faith. There's no such thing as blind faith. The virtue of faith allows us to see what we could not otherwise see. And when this happens, the thing which we formerly did not know truly becomes ours. And you know, I would just encourage our participants today to read this text very much in that kind of personal, spiritual way, to place ourselves in the shoes of this blind man. Because our journey Our journey to the nativity of Christ is going to very much follow that journey of Christ to Jerusalem. And we will either be the one crying out, realizing our own need for Christ, for the one who's going to come to heal us, or we will ultimately be the ones who turn our back on him. You know, at the end of this text, Father, it says that that the people glorified God. They praised God, it says, for what they had seen. But interesting enough, it doesn't say that they gave thanks to Jesus or praised Jesus. I wonder if you could just comment on that for a moment.
Yeah, this is returning to that image or that theme of stages of revelation you mentioned at the beginning. They see him as Jesus of Nazareth, and then the blind man says, no, he's the Son of David, he's the Christ. And then as the gospel is progressing here, this is what the second half of the gospel is doing. And Luke does it from the very beginning, but it really starts to happen over and over again in a rapid pace at the end of these synoptic gospels, where the revelation now that the human king or the earthly king they were waiting for is actually also the divine king. And so you get that here. It says, and Jesus said to him, receive your sight, your faith has saved you. And at once he received his sight and followed Jesus, glorifying God. And all the people, upon seeing it, gave praise to God. And this, I think, recalls for us a little bit of a switch, just like we get earlier in the gospel at the healing of the Gadarene demoniac, where the demoniac says, after Jesus heals him, Jesus gets into the boat. The crowds want him to go away, so Jesus gets in the boat with his disciples and about to go back across the sea. And the now healed demoniac, this Gadarene man who's now received his sanity and his spiritual health back, says, please let me come with you. And Jesus says, no, you stay here and tell everybody what God has done for you. And then the passage concludes, Luke says, by the man went around that entire region telling everyone what Jesus had done for him. So that was what we're getting here as well. Jesus of Nazareth is, yes, Jesus of Nazareth, but he's the long-awaited Davidic Messiah. But he's not simply that. He's actually God in their presence. While some see him, and he was certainly a man, he had a human nature. He walked around, he looked like a Jew, looked like a regular human being, looked like a regular Jew of the time, from that region. But those who have eyes of faith, like you said, like this man, can see something more, that he is actually God in our presence.
That point is so important as we are singing in the church. I was thinking as you were talking about the Kondakion of the preparation for the nativity of the Lord. It's Pre-Christmas Kondakion, as we call it, which recognizes, yes, this newborn child, this young child, but ultimately comes to reveal to us the reality of who this child is. So again, not looking only back historically at the child in Bethlehem, but the one who's coming now as God from all eternity, the resurrected one. The church is focusing very much our attention upon this mystery of Christ's second coming. So we sing in that Kondakion, today the Virgin is on her way to the cave where she will give birth to the transcendent in essence. Rejoice therefore, O universe, and not only Bethlehem, the universe, when we hear this news, and glorify with the angels and the shepherds him who shall appear as a young child, who is God from all eternity. So we have this realization now, something more than they knew in Bethlehem, something more than they even realized could possibly be the case. And this realization, as you're saying, kind of in the gospel comes to a head here in the end of the Galilean ministry, as Jesus is heading into Jerusalem. I would only add this, that while the world is setting up their Christmas trees and they're hanging their light bulbs and their stockings and so forth, God is coming. Jesus is coming, and this time not only as an infant, but as the resurrected eternal God. And the real question is, where do we stand in the crowd? Where do we stand in the crowd there that day in Jericho? And where do we stand in the crowd today in our society? And it's this final verse of the gospel about giving praise to God, that we then are given as a gift liturgically. We get to stand in the liturgy and do the very thing which at least some of those in that crowd, and certainly the blind man who was healed, did, to sing praise to our God. Sing praise, we sing this Sunday. Sing praise to our King. Sing praise. As I've said before, focus here on the second coming of Christ in these weeks prior to the nativity of the Lord, and it's for this reason that we're given the text in Colossians. We don't need to read it today, but I want to encourage our participants to get out your Bibles, to continue this study, and stand there in the context of this gospel passage as you read Colossians, which begins with this giving thanks to God for those of us who have lifted up our voice in praise. We have come to know who this is, who is journeying through Jericho. We have come to know who this is with the blind man. We have come to know who this is who is coming to us in the flesh. It is truly God from all eternity. And of course, this realization takes place for us in our life in the context of holy baptism, which is referred to in this text from Colossians. And I encourage you to read it then as an invitation to place yourself in that context, in this preparation for the nativity of the Lord. As an old priest told me once, where there is no preparation, there will be no fulfillment. And where there is preparation, where there is expectation, Christ will come and make himself present to us. He will come to open our eyes and allow us to see again. To Christ our God be glory both now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen.